Hello, and welcome back to the world of Wysteria. And we will now continue with part 2 of chapter 13. They stepped through the crowd of smiling revelers and found a seat on one of the long wooden benches surrounding the ring of dancers. Charlotte was now on the far side of the fire, but as she and her partner spun closer, Emily began waving and managed to get her attention. Charlotte smiled and blew her a kiss as she whirled past, caught in the current of dancers orbiting the flames. "This is really nice, Will," said Emily, cuddling up next to him. "What a great idea. A perfect way to end the day." "Actually, this, the bonfire, is what started me thinking about the whole time issue," he told her. "I had a passing notion that the festival should include an evening bonfire. Then, one thing led to another. The clock, the sunset, the moon. It got complicated quickly." "It got complicated because you're so logical," she said, laughing. "You're following the logic, the cause and effect, that applies in the waking world." "Do you think that's a mistake?" he asked. "No, not necessarily," she replied. "I'm sure that's part of the reason Wysteria is so stable and so real. You've created an interactive structure that supports all the elements of your world and allows them to stand on their own, at least to some extent. Just don't let that logic limit you." Soon, the dance came to an end, and the musicians announced they were taking a short break. Charlotte gave her partner a kiss on the cheek, then ran over to join Will and Emily. "So," said Emily, "you look like you were having fun." "Yes, I was," Charlotte replied, all smiles and short of breath. "And I see you made a new friend." "You mean the boy I was dancing with?" she asked, sitting down next to Emily. "He's sweet. And cute, huh? I was just standing by the fire, and when the music started, he came up to me and asked if I wanted to dance." Then, at Emily's request, Charlotte began telling her how she'd spent the afternoon. As Will sat watching the bonfire and listening to the girls talk, he noticed a woman moving through the throng, filling people's tankards from an earthenware pitcher she carried. At first, her face was cloaked in shadows, but then she stepped forward into the firelight. "Emily," he whispered. "Yes?" "Remember the woman I told you about," he said. "The one I met in the tavern?" Emily thought for a minute. "You mean Lily, the woman you kissed?" "Yes, I remember." "That's her, over there," he said, pointing her out with a nod of his head. "The one pouring drinks." "Who is she?" asked Charlotte. "Another dreamer?" "It's Will's girlfriend," Emily replied, nudging Will with her elbow. "She's just someone I met during one of my first dreams here," he said. "But there was something unusual about her. She seemed to know things that she shouldn't." "She's a beauty," Charlotte remarked. "Do you think she could be a dreamer?" Emily asked her. Charlotte studied her for a moment. "I don't think so," she said. "I can usually tell. But what?" "I don't know," said Charlotte. There's something about her. Just then, as if suddenly sensing she was being watched, Lily looked in their direction. She stared straight at Will, and a warm smile spread across her lips. Her expression changed from pleased to surprised to disdainful as she glanced at the girls, first at Emily, then at Charlotte. Her eyes met Will's again, and the smile returned, though with a melancholy cast. Then she turned away and disappeared back into the crowd. "Wow, did you see that dirty look she gave you?" Emily said to Charlotte. "Maybe that was her boyfriend I was dancing with," she replied, laughing, though a little uncomfortably. The musicians had returned to their instruments, and people were beginning to congregate around the fire, pairing up for the next dance. Charlotte took Emily's hand and stood up. "Come on," she said. And before Emily could voice any objections, Charlotte pulled her out of her seat and into the dance circle, just as the musicians struck up a beat and began to play. Will smiled as he watched the girls dance, arming and swinging each other around the fire. It had been a great day. The festival, the sunset, the moonrise, and he was able to share all of it with her. Then he felt a hand on his shoulder. Startled, he turned and saw it belonged to Lily, who stood close behind him, staring intently as the dancers as they rounded the fire. "She's very pretty," she said in a soft, sultry voice. "I suppose she's the reason you haven't come by to see me." "Well," he began, flustered by her sudden appearance. "Don't worry, dear," said Lily, cutting him short. "I understand. You don't need to explain." She smiled as she ran her fingers through his hair. "You're in love, both of you. I can see it." Then, bending down and putting her lips close to his ear, she whispered, "But remember, she is but a visitor, and visitors will come and go. I've been yours since before you can remember, and I will always be here, waiting." She lingered there for a moment, her lips hovering near his cheek, as if poised to give or receive a kiss. Then, sighing, she stood up straight. "That other one, though," she said, her eyes on the girls as they danced. "Be careful, Will." And before he could respond, she turned and walked away. The dance ended, and the girls came bouncing back to their seats. Still somewhat shaken by this second mysterious encounter with Lily, Will managed to smile as he welcomed them back, unsure whether they'd seen Lily talking to him. If they hadn't, he wasn't eager to mention their conversation, considering what she'd said. "Thanks for letting me borrow your gal, Will," said Charlotte. "Of course," he replied. "And thank you for inviting me to your party," she added. "I've had a really great time." "Good," he said. "You're always welcome here, although I'm afraid you might find it boring under normal circumstances. It's usually a pretty quiet place." "I heard you had some trouble with unruly visitors," she said. "Yes," Emily chimed in. "While we were dancing, I told her about our run-in with Nathan's men the other day." And according to Emily, Charlotte continued, you handled them pretty well. I wish I could have seen that. I'm sure Nathan was fuming when he heard what happened, especially since Emily was with you. I'm just glad they weren't able to get their hands on her, he said. What? Said Charlotte, looking at Emily aghast. They tried to snatch you? You didn't tell me that. It was nothing, Emily replied, trying to pacify her friend. His goons recognized me, and one of them made a feeble attempt to grab me. That's all. Nathan couldn't have known I was here, so I'm sure he didn't order them to do it. Still, said Charlotte, that's very upsetting. If anything happened to you, I'd feel responsible. I should never have taken you to that hellhole of a world. I asked you to take me, Emily reminded her. It's not your fault. And besides, we'll chase them off, and I'm sure they won't be back again. Now, please forget about it. I don't want to discuss it anymore. It's not how I want to spend my time tonight. Okay, said Charlotte, patting Emily on the hand. Just promise me you'll be careful. Nathan's an idiot, but he's very vindictive, and he's used to getting what he wants. Don't worry, she said reassuringly. I'm not going anywhere near his world. The girls then embraced, putting an end to the subject. The three of them sat quietly for a few minutes, basking in the mellow glow of the fire, which had now burned down considerably. Though most of the populace remained in the square, it seemed that things were beginning to wind down. Emily leaned her head on Will's shoulder and yawned. I'm starting to get sleepy, she said. I'll have to leave soon. Me too, said Charlotte. I can feel that time approaching. The witching hour, said Will. Charlotte laughed. Yes, she replied. Time to hop on my broom and scurry back to the land of wake-believe. They all stood up and reluctantly began saying their goodbyes. Charlotte gave them each a hug, thanking Will for his hospitality and promising Emily they would talk soon. Then, blowing them both kisses, she quickly lost her solid form and disappeared from his world. I don't want to go, Will, said Emily, as they held each other in a parting embrace. Will I see you tomorrow? He asked. She kissed him sweetly on the lips, then slowly backed away. Yes, I'll be here, she said. Will watched as the firelight began to shine through Emily's body, and within moments she was gone, leaving him alone, staring into the flames. Not that he was really alone. He was surrounded by scores of people. Looking at their faces, he saw members of his community, not elements of a dreamscape. They were his fellow citizens, but, unlike him, this was the only world they knew. In a way, thought Will, it's more their world than mine. And thank you for joining me this afternoon, and we will return soon with Chapter 14.